Prologue. The silence was the first thing that screamed. One moment, the engine of my Mercedes was a low, reassuring purr on a forgotten backroad in the middle of nowhere, Washington. The next, a violent shudder, a sickening cough, and then, nothing. The only sound was the frantic, useless click-click-click as I turned the key again and again. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. My knuckles were white on the leather steering wheel. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was Chloe Larson. I managed a $50 million portfolio. I negotiated hostile takeovers. I didn't get stranded on roads that looked like they were swallowed by pine trees. My phone predictably had 0 bars. The digital clock on the dash glowed a mocking 7:15 p.m. The sun had already bled out behind the jagged teeth of the mountains, leaving the sky a deep, bruised purple. The forest on either side of the road wasn't the peaceful, calming green of postcards. It was a dense, suffocating black, a wall of shadows that seemed to press in on the car, on me. "Hey Chloe. Think," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Problem solve." But there was no problem to solve. There was no signal to call for help. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. My $500 heels were useless for walking, and my tailored business suit offered 0 protection against the evening chill that was already seeping through the glass. I was a fish out of water, a canary in a coal mine, a lamb for the... A twig snapped in the woods to my left. It was loud. Too loud to be a squirrel or a bird. My head whipped toward the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every horror movie I'd ever seen, every ghost story told around a campfire, rose up from my memory like bile. I locked the doors. The soft thump of the mechanism was ridiculously inadequate against the vast, listening darkness. I held my breath, straining my ears. Nothing. Just the wind whispering through the colossal pines, a sound that now seemed less like a whisper and more like a warning. Then I smelled it. It was faint at first, carried on the breeze. Damp earth, pine needles, and something else. Something primal and musky. It was the scent of a predator. The kind of raw, animal smell that bypasses the brain and speaks directly to the oldest, most terrified part of your soul. My breath fogged up the window. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my silk blouse, pressing my face close to the cold glass. My eyes scanned the impenetrable wall of trees, searching for, what? A bear? A mountain lion? I found eyes instead. 2 of them. Then 4. 6. A dozen pairs of eyes, glowing with a faint, predatory gold in the encroaching darkness. They were low to the ground, spread out in a perfect semicircular formation, hemming me in. They weren't scattered like random animals. They were organized. A hunting party. A pack. A low growl rumbled through the air, so deep I felt it in the chassis of the car, in the fillings of my teeth. It was a sound of absolute, unquestionable dominance. This was their world. Their road. And I was trespassing. A whimper escaped my lips. My carefully constructed world of logic, numbers, and contracts had evaporated. It was meaningless here. Here there was only one rule, the predator and the prey. And I knew with a certainty that froze the blood in my veins which one I was. The bushes rustled not to my left or my right, but directly in front of the car. I didn't see a wolf emerge. I saw a man. He stepped out of the shadows and onto the cracked pavement with a fluid grace that was utterly inhuman. He was huge, not just tall but broad, built with the kind of dense, powerful muscle that comes from a life of struggle, not from a gym. He wore a simple dark Henley and worn jeans, clothes that did nothing to hide the sheer force of his presence. His hair was the color of midnight, shaggy and untamed, and his face was all hard angles and shadow, his jaw tight with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the air around him. But his eyes, they were the same as the others. The same molten, predatory gold. He walked slowly, deliberately toward my driver's side door, the rest of the pack remaining hidden in the trees, a silent, menacing jury. He didn't look at the car, he looked right through the window, right into me. It was a look of such intensity, of such ancient and unwavering authority, that I felt pinned to my seat, unable to breathe, unable to think. He stopped beside my door, close enough that I could see the dark stubble on his jaw, the faint old scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He didn't try the handle. He just stood there, his golden eyes stripping away every layer of my composure, my confidence, my identity. He was looking at my soul, and I think he found it wanting. Finally he spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, the same sound the earth had made just moments before. "You're on the wrong side of the border," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a death sentence. "My car, it broke down," I stammered, the words feeling flimsy and pathetic. "I didn't. I'll just wait for a tow truck." A humorless smile touched his lips, a flash of white in the gloom. "There are no tow trucks here." He raised a hand, and for a heart-stopping second I thought he was going to smash the glass. Instead he just rested his palm flat against the window. It was a gesture of terrifying intimacy. I could feel the heat of his skin through the barrier between us. "Please," I begged, the single word a surrender. "Just let me go." "No," he said, the word an iron door slamming shut. "You've been smelled. You've been seen. The scent of you is already on the wind." His eyes flickered for a moment, looking past me, deeper into the dark woods behind the car, a flicker of something that wasn't just dominance but concern. "You're not going anywhere." Before I could process his words, his hand was gone from the window. There was a horrific screech of protesting metal as his fingers curled around the top of the door frame. With a single fluid motion that defied all logic and strength, he tore the car door from its hinges and tossed it aside as if it were made of cardboard. It crashed into the woods with a deafening clang. I screamed. It was a raw, ragged sound torn from the deepest part of my terror. He leaned in, the wild, musky scent of him flooding the small space, intoxicating and terrifying. His arms snaked around my waist, his grip like steel. He pulled me from the car, lifting me from my seat as if I weighed nothing at all. I was pressed against his chest, a solid wall of heat and power. My mind went blank with sheer, unadulterated fear. This was it. This was how I died. Eaten by monsters on the side of a forgotten road. He turned, holding me against him, and started walking toward the darkness of the woods. Toward the waiting, glowing eyes. I could feel the rumble in his chest as he spoke, his words not for me but for the shadows that moved with us. "She's mine." Chapter 1. The world became a dizzying collage of sensations. The rough texture of his shirt against my cheek, the solid rhythmic beat of his heart against my ear, the impossible heat rolling off his body. My feet dangled uselessly above the forest floor, my expensive heels lost somewhere back on the road. I was a doll in his arms, a prize he was carrying back to his den. The pack moved with us, silent wraiths in the periphery. I didn't see them as wolves anymore, just as shifting, muscular shadows, their golden eyes cutting through the gloom like shards of glass. Panic was a living thing inside me, a frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. I should have been fighting, screaming, clawing at his face. But my body was locked in a state of primal shock, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. My mind, the one thing I had always been able to rely on, could not compute this reality. Men did not tear off car doors. Men did not have eyes that glowed in the dark. He moved through the dense undergrowth with an eerie silence and purpose, never stumbling, never hesitating. It was like the forest parted for him. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin and a new scent hit me, wood smoke. We stepped into a clearing. It wasn't a cave or a primitive camp. It was a small, self-contained town, nestled in a valley and surrounded by a formidable-looking wooden palisade at least 15 feet high. Log cabins, larger than I expected and sturdily built, were arranged around a central common area where a massive bonfire crackled, spitting embers into the night sky. Figures moved around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. They were people. Men, women, even a few children. They looked normal, dressed in practical clothes like jeans, flannels, and boots. But as we drew closer, they all turned and I saw it. They all had the same eyes. That same unsettling, luminous gold. The man holding me, their alpha, their king, didn't slow his pace. He strode through the center of the settlement as if he were the only person there, the others parting before him like water around a stone. Whispers followed us, hushed and curious. I buried my face deeper into his chest, a pathetic attempt to hide from the dozens of predatory eyes now fixed on me. He finally stopped before one of the largest cabins, set slightly apart from the others. He kicked the door open and carried me inside, shutting it behind us with his heel. The interior was shockingly normal. Rustic, yes, but clean and well-kept. There was a large stone fireplace, a worn leather sofa, a heavy wooden table with chairs. Animal pelts were thrown over the furniture, and the air still held that wild, musky scent of him, but it was a home. He set me down on my feet, and my legs, weak with adrenaline and terror, nearly buckled. I stumbled and he caught my arm, his grip firm and steadying. The contact was like an electric shock, a jolt of pure energy that shot up my arm. "Don't fall," he said, his voice a low command. I finally found my own voice, though it came out as a ragged, desperate whisper. "Who are you? What are you?" He let go of my arm and moved to the fireplace, stoking the embers with an iron poker. The firelight danced across the hard planes of his face, making him seem both more and less human. "My name is Declan," he said, not looking at me. "And you already know what we are. You've always known. Your stories and nightmares are full of us. Werewolves." The word hung in the air, unspoken but absolute. My rational mind screamed in protest, but the evidence was undeniable. The strength, the eyes, the pack. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked, wrapping my arms around myself. "Are you going to kill me?" He finally turned to look at me, his golden eyes pinning me in place. "If I wanted you dead, I would have left you on that road." His words didn't comfort me. They only deepened the mystery. "Then what do you want?" "I don't have anything. This is for ransom, my company." "I don't want your money," he cut in, his voice sharp with impatience. He walked toward me and I instinctively took a step back, my spine hitting the rough wood of the door. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I was once again trapped in the intensity of his presence. "I want to know why you were there. No one comes up that road by accident. It's not on any map. So tell me, Chloe Larson," he said, and my blood ran cold when he spoke my name. "Who are you running from?" How did he know my name? My purse. It was still in the car. He must have seen my ID. "I'm not running from anyone," I lied, my voice shaking. "I took a wrong turn. I was trying to find a shortcut back to Seattle after a business meeting in Spokane." Declan's expression didn't change, but I felt the weight of his disbelief. He knew I was lying. He took another step forward, closing the remaining distance between us. He was so close now I had to crane my neck to look up at him. He lifted a hand and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. It was a gesture so disarmingly human that it terrified me more than his show of strength had. "The lie smells on you," he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft growl. "Fear, I understand. But deceit? My home? I don't tolerate it." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "You smell of city concrete and paper money, but underneath that you smell of fear. A fear that started long before you saw my pack in the woods." Before I could respond, the cabin door burst open. A man who looked nearly as broad as Declan, with a thick reddish-brown beard and colder, harder eyes, stormed in. "Declan, what is the meaning of this?" the man demanded, his gaze falling on me with open hostility. "You bring a human astray into the heart of our home? After everything we've been through?" Declan didn't even turn around. "Watch your tone, Marcus," he said, his voice deceptively calm but laced with steel. "You forget who you're speaking to." "I forget nothing," Marcus snarled. "I remember the scent of burning wood and scorched flesh. I remember what happens when our borders are crossed. He could be a scout. A spy." He took a menacing step toward me. "She has the stink of them on her." "Them," I whispered, my eyes darting between the two formidable men. Declan finally turned, placing himself squarely between me and the hostile newcomer. He was taller than Marcus, and the aura of command that rolled off him was absolute. "She is not one of them. She is a terrified woman whose car broke down. Nothing more." "And you know this for sure?" Marcus challenged, though his aggression was tempered by a sliver of caution now. "I know that she is under my protection," Declan stated, the words leaving no room for argument. She will stay here in my cabin until I decide otherwise. You will not touch her. You will not threaten her. None of you will. Is that understood? Marcus's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He stared at Declan for a long, tense moment, a silent battle of wills passing between them. Finally, with a low growl of frustration, Marcus gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. As you command, Alpha. He shot one last venomous look in my direction before turning and storming out of the cabin, slamming the door behind him. The silence he left behind was heavy and fraught with unspoken questions. I was trembling again, the adrenaline from the new confrontation coursing through me. Declan turned back to me, his expression unreadable. You'll be safe from my pack, he said, his voice returning to its low, rumbling tone. As long as you stay in here. And what about you? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Am I safe from you? A flicker of something, amusement, regret, crossed his features. That depends on you. Don't lie to me again. He gestured to a closed door in the corner of the room. That's a bedroom. You can sleep there. The door has a lock. Hope, fragile and fleeting, fluttered in my chest. A lock. He must have seen the relief in my eyes, because his mouth twisted into that same humorless smile. It only locks from the outside. And just like that, the hope died. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't being protected. I was a prisoner. A specimen in a cage. As I walked on shaky legs toward the bedroom, I was suddenly hit by the full weight of Marcus's words. He has the stink of them on her. What's outside the fence you should worry about? Declan wasn't just a monster who had captured me. He was a king who had brought me inside his castle walls. And the terrifying question that began to bloom in my mind was not how I would escape him, but what kind of far more terrible thing was he trying to keep out? Sleep was a luxury my terror wouldn't afford me. I spent the first night in the small, Spartan bedroom pressed against the far wall, perched on the edge of a simple bed that smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of wind outside, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. I was a cornered animal listening for the footsteps of the predator. The lock on the outside of the door was a constant, oppressive weight in my mind. The room itself was a paradox. It was clearly a prison, yet it was not uncomfortable. A thick hand-stitched quilt lay folded on the bed. A small wooden nightstand held an old-fashioned oil lamp. There was a single small window high on the wall, its glass wavy and distorted, offering only a sliver of the bruised pre-dawn sky. There was no escape. My world, once measured in quarterly earnings and stock market fluctuations, had shrunk to the 4 rough-hewn walls of this room. The power suit I was still wearing felt like a ridiculous costume from another life. I was Chloe Larson, the shark, the closer. But here, stripped of my phone, my car, and my authority, I was nothing. Just flesh and bone and a wildly beating heart. Morning came not with an alarm but with the sounds of a community waking. Muffled voices, the clang of metal on metal, the distant sound of an axe splitting wood. It was unnervingly domestic. Sometime later I heard footsteps approach the door. I scrambled back onto the bed, pulling my knees to my chest as the lock scraped open. It wasn't Declan or the hostile Marcus. It was a woman. She was older, perhaps in her late 50s, with strands of silver woven through her long, dark braid. Her face was a map of kind wrinkles, but her eyes, the same startling gold as the others, were sharp and missed nothing. She carried a wooden tray holding a bowl of steaming porridge, a hunk of bread and a mug of water. "You should eat," she said. Her voice was calm with a slightly rough, earthy quality. She set the tray down on the small nightstand, her movements efficient and unhurried. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "My name is Elena," she replied, her gaze lingering on my disheveled state, my wrinkled suit. She left the room for a moment and returned with a folded pile of clothes. Simple cotton trousers, a soft, gray long-sleeved shirt and thick wool socks. They looked clean and well-worn. "These will be more comfortable. Leave the tray outside the door when you're finished." She was treating this like I was a guest at a rustic bed and breakfast, not a hostage. The sheer absurdity of it made a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest, but I choked it down. Why is he doing this? I pressed, desperate for an answer, any answer. Declan. Why am I being kept here? Elena paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She looked at me not with pity but with a kind of weary resignation. The Alpha has his reasons. He doesn't share them lightly. She glanced toward the small high window. This valley is the only safe place for leagues. Sometimes the safest place to be is inside a cage. You'd do well to remember that. She closed the door and the lock slid home once more, leaving me alone with her cryptic words and the scent of oatmeal. The food was surprisingly good and I ate with a hunger that shamed me. It felt like a betrayal of my own terror to find comfort in something so simple. After changing into the borrowed clothes, which were a little big but infinitely better than my suit, a strange sense of lethargy settled over me. There was nothing to do. No calls to make, no emails to answer, no problems to solve. For the first time in my adult life, I was utterly, completely powerless. That night, the true nature of my prison became terrifyingly clear. I was jolted from a light, uneasy doze by a sound. It started low, a distant cry that slithered through the cracks in the cabin walls. It wasn't the howl of a wolf. I'd heard their calls in the woods, deep and resonant, a wild and beautiful music. This was different. This was a shriek of pure, unadulterated agony and rage, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of the night itself. It was guttural and wet, as if the creature making it was choking on its own madness. I shot upright in bed, my heart seizing in my chest. The sound came again, closer this time, and it was followed by a chorus of others, a symphony of torment from the dark woods beyond the palisade. Outside my room, the cabin came alive. I heard the scrape of a chair, the low, urgent rumble of Declan's voice, and the heavy thud of boots on the wooden floor. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. How many? Declan's voice was tight, strained. Scouts saw at least 4 on the western ridge, came Marcus's reply, his earlier hostility gone, replaced by a grim tension. They're testing the line again. The scent of her wrecked car must have drawn them in. Get the perimeter teams doubled. I want torches on every watch post. Nothing gets through, Declan commanded. There was a low growl of assent, and then the main cabin door opened and closed. I heard Declan pacing back and forth in the main room, a restless, caged energy in his steps. The horrifying shrieks outside continued, a relentless assault on the senses. I could feel the vibrations of them in the floorboards. I could hear the pack outside, the low, threatening growls of Declan's people answering the challenge from the darkness. They were afraid. These powerful, terrifying wolf people were afraid of what was outside, and that fact terrified me more than anything else. The sounds finally faded with the approach of dawn, leaving behind an exhausted, ringing silence. I didn't sleep again. Elena brought my meals the next day without a word, her face drawn and tired. The entire settlement was blanketed in a tense, watchful quiet. It wasn't until that evening that the lock on my door slid open and Declan stood there, filling the frame. He looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his golden eyes, and his jaw was covered in a rough stubble. He just stared at me for a long moment, his gaze intense, searching. "You heard them last night," he stated. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump of fear in my throat. "Those are the things I'm protecting you from," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We call them the wretched. Once they were like us, shifters. But they were twisted by a sickness, a blight that eats their minds and their souls, leaving only hunger and pain. They hunt everything. Humans. They are drawn to weakness, to blood, and to fear." His explanation settled over me like a shroud. This was something worse. Not just a rival pack, but a mindless, tormented plague. "Why tell me this?" I finally managed to ask. "Because I need to know what you brought to my doorstep," he said, stepping into the room and shutting the door behind him, enclosing us in the small space. My heart rate kicked up. Marcus was right. They were drawn to the scent of your car, to the smell of your panic. But their interest is unusual. They are testing my borders with more aggression than I've seen in years. He took a step closer. "So I will ask you again, Chloe. Who were you running from?" This was my chance to tell him. To explain that I wasn't a spy, that I was just a woman whose life had imploded. I had been betrayed by my mentor, a man I trusted like a father. He had framed me for embezzlement to cover his own crimes, leaving me with a ruined reputation and the threat of federal prison. I had packed a bag, drained my accounts and driven, with no destination in mind other than away. But looking into his demanding, imperious eyes, my own pride and defiance rose up. He was my captor. I owed him nothing. I told you, I said, lifting my chin. I took a wrong turn. A low growl vibrated in his chest. You are an infuriatingly stubborn woman. He reached out, grabbing my chin with a gentle but firm pressure, forcing me to meet his gaze. His thumb brushed against my lower lip. Every time you lie, your heart rate changes. Your scent sours. Did you think I wouldn't know? We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills, his thumb a searing brand against my skin. The air in the room was thick with tension, with his wild scent, with the unspoken things hanging between us. He was too close, too big, too everything. Yet beneath my fear, a different, more confusing feeling stirred. A strange awareness of him not just as a monster but as a man. They will come for you, Chloe, he murmured, his golden eyes searching mine. The things you're running from. Men in suits with warrants and laws. They are just as relentless as the monsters in the woods. But they can be tracked. They will lead the wretched right here. He let go of me, stepping back and creating a chasm of space between us. You have brought a war to my family, whether you meant to or not. He turned and left, locking the door behind him. I sank onto the bed, his final words echoing in my mind. A war. I had escaped one prison only to find myself in another, and in my desperation, I had become the fuse for a bomb I didn't even know existed. I was trapped between two worlds, two sets of monsters, with only a reluctant, terrifying warden standing between me and the things that shrieked in the night. Chapter 3. Declan's accusation hung in the silence of my room long after he was gone, a poison seeping into my thoughts. You have brought a war to my family. Before, my fear was selfish, focused on my own survival. Now it was colored with the bitter taste of guilt. Every time I heard the distant, tormented shrieks of the wretched at night, and they came every night now, a relentless, probing assault, I pictured the faces in the compound, the children I'd glimpsed playing by the fire, the weary woman who brought my meals. I had, in my desperate flight, led one monster to the doorstep of another. For 2 more days I was left in complete isolation, stewing in my anxiety. The routine was the same. Elena would bring my meals, her expression growing more strained each time, and she would take the empty tray without a word. The tension in the settlement was a palpable thing, a low hum of dread that even I could feel through the thick cabin walls. On the 3rd morning after Declan's visit, the lock on my door scraped open, but this time it didn't shut again. Declan stood in the doorway, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He was dressed for the outdoors in heavy boots and a dark, practical jacket. "Get up," he commanded. "You're coming with me." My heart leaped into my throat. "Where?" "You're a liability locked in here," he said, his tone clipped in all business. "You know nothing of us, nothing of this place. That makes you unpredictable. Today that changes. You'll see how we live. You'll see the price of your secrets." He didn't wait for my reply, just turned and walked into the main room. Trembling, I pulled on the wool socks and followed him. The thought of leaving the cabin was both terrifying and intoxicating. Marcus was standing by the fireplace, his face a mask of thunderous disapproval. He opened his mouth to protest, but Declan shot him a look so potent, so filled with silent warning, that Marcus snapped his jaw shut, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The crisp morning air was a shock to my system after days of confinement. It was cold and smelled of pine, wood smoke, and damp earth. Declan led me out into the center of the compound, and for the first time I saw it in the clear light of day. It was a marvel of rustic engineering and survivalist grit. The cabins were built with interlocking logs, chinked with mud and moss. A blacksmith's hammer rang out from a large open-air shed. Women were stretching hides on wooden frames, and a group of older children were practicing with bows and arrows, their movements serious and focused under the watchful eye of an instructor. This wasn't a pack of monsters. This was a community, A family fighting to survive in a world that had forgotten them. My presence did not go unnoticed. Conversations quieted as we passed. People stopped what they were doing to stare, their golden eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I felt like a microbe under a microscope. I instinctively moved closer to Declan's side, his imposing presence the only thing that felt remotely like a shield. He led me toward a long, low building from which a faint, herbal scent emanated. Inside, the air was warmer. It was an infirmary. Several cots lined the walls, and in two of them lay shifters, their bodies wrapped in clean bandages. Elena was there, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. I saw now that her weariness wasn't just from stress. She was the pack's healer. One of the injured men had a deep, vicious-looking series of claw marks across his shoulder. The flesh around the wound was blackened and angry. "Wretched claw?" Declan asked Elena, his voice low. She nodded without looking up from her work. "The poison spreads quickly. But we cauterized it in time. He'll live." My stomach churned. This was real. The abstract shrieks in the night had a tangible, brutal consequence. These people were getting hurt defending the walls that I was now living behind. Defending them from a threat that I had apparently made worse. Declan watched me, his expression unreadable. "This is the cost, Chloe. Every night my people put their lives between this valley and the things you drew here. They do it without question." We left the infirmary, the image of the poisoned wound burned into my mind. He walked me to the edge of the compound toward the towering wooden palisade. A set of steep stairs led to a walkway that ran along the top. He gestured for me to climb. My legs felt unsteady, but I ascended, him right behind me. From the top the view was staggering. The entire valley spread out below, a bowl of green and brown cupped in the hands of the formidable mountain range. But looking out beyond the wall, the forest seemed darker, more menacing. I could see the cleared perimeter, a wide, muddy belt of land where the trees had been cut back. It was a kill zone. A young man no older than 20 stood watch on the wall with us, a massive crossbow resting against the railing. He nodded respectfully at Declan. "Alpha." "Quiet morning." "Let's hope it stays that way, Ben," Declan replied, clapping a hand on the young man's shoulder before turning his attention to me. "This wall is all that keeps us alive," he said, his voice softer now, almost conversational. "My father built the first post. I've spent my entire life adding to it, strengthening it. Everything we do, every law we have, every hardship we endure, it's all to protect this place." He leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We are harsh because the world outside is harsher. We value strength because weakness means death. We don't trust outsiders because the last time we did, it ended in fire and ash." I finally understood. The strict rules, Marcus's hostility, his own demanding nature. It wasn't born of simple cruelty. It was a shield forged in the fires of loss. It was survival. We stood in silence for a long time, the cold wind whipping strands of hair across my face. The weight of my lie, of my selfish, stubborn pride, felt like a physical stone in my gut. These people, whom I had seen as monstrous captors, were fighting a desperate war, and I had just made their battlefield more dangerous. They deserved the truth. They deserved to know exactly what kind of enemy might be coming for me and by extension for them. My decision was made. The fear of his anger was nothing compared to the shame I felt. "Declan," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He turned to look at me, his golden eyes questioning. "You were right," I said, forcing myself to meet his intense gaze. "I was running. And I need to tell you everything." Chapter 4. We didn't stay on the wall. The moment the words left my mouth, Declan's entire demeanor shifted. The distant alpha was gone, replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. He gripped my arm, not painfully but with an undeniable urgency, and led me back down the stairs and straight to his cabin. He kicked the door shut behind us, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. The air in the room was thick with unspoken gravity. He didn't sit. He didn't stoke the fire. He stood in the center of the room, a mountain of contained energy, and pinned me with his gaze. "Talk," he commanded. The single word was a key turning in a lock I had kept sealed for weeks. And so I did. The story came pouring out of me, a torrent of fear, betrayal, and desperation. I told him about my career, about my mentor Jonathan Vance, a man who had built a financial empire and had taken me under his wing right out of business school. A man I had admired, respected, and trusted implicitly. I explained how I had started noticing discrepancies, small at first, then larger, in the accounts of a shell corporation he managed. He called it creative accounting, I said, my voice hollow as I relived the memory. Aggressive investment strategies. He had an answer for everything. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. I told Declan how I had finally found the smoking gun, a series of offshore transfers that proved Vance was laundering money for a dangerous international cartel. When I confronted him, armed with irrefutable proof, he hadn't denied it. He had simply smiled, a cold, reptilian expression, and told me that my name was on just as many of the key documents as his. He had been setting me up for years, I whispered, the shame of my own blindness burning in my throat. Grooming me to be the perfect scapegoat. He gave me a choice: disappear and take the blame, or he would make a call and his associates would make my family disappear instead. My parents, my sister. The thought of them, safe and oblivious in their quiet suburban lives, was the only thing that had propelled me forward. It was why I had packed my car with cash from a safe deposit box, destroyed my personal laptop, and driven without a plan. So the men in suits I mentioned, Declan said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. They aren't just FBI, are they? I shook my head, a single tear tracing a cold path down my cheek. Vance works with the Petrov Syndicate. Eastern European. They don't leave loose ends. And they have a reputation for being thorough. Their trackers are relentless. Vance told me they use ex-military former intelligence guys. The best money can buy. Declan was silent for a long time, his expression carved from stone. He paced the length of the cabin, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He was processing, analyzing, the mind of a strategist at work behind the eyes of a predator. I had expected anger, and I told you so. But what I saw on his face was something far more terrifying, grim, calculated understanding. He wasn't surprised. The wretched, he finally said, stopping his pacing to look at me. Their behavior makes sense now. I frowned, confused. What do you mean? They are drawn to violence. To the scent of death and corruption, he explained, his eyes seeming to look right through me at the threat I couldn't see. These men tracking you, they are killers. They carry the stench of their work on them. It's like ringing a dinner bell in the dark. The wretched have been following your hunters, growing more agitated, drawn by the promise of a bloody meal. Your trail didn't just lead them here. It created a convoy of monsters. The room tilted. I leaned against the heavy wooden table for support, my legs suddenly weak. My pursuers were not just men. They were magnets for something worse. And I had dragged this entire bloody chain of predation to the one place on earth that had offered me a sliver of safety. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The choice is no longer just about protecting you, he said, and his words were like a physical blow. It's about protecting my people from your mess. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of profound frustration. If your hunters get close, they will bring the wretched down on us in numbers we haven't seen in a generation. And if I throw you out... He let the sentence hang in the air, but I knew what he meant. I would die. Horribly. And my death would not stop the men hunting me from finding this place. The damage was already done. There has to be a way, I pleaded. I can give you money. All of it. When this is over. Your money is worthless here, he roared, slamming his fist on the table. The wood shuddered and I flinched back, my heart pounding. His eyes blazed with a raw, feral fury. For a moment the alpha was gone and only the wolf remained. You think I'm doing this for profit? My people are dying out there. My home, the home my father bled for, is being threatened because of a mistake you made. The silence that followed his outburst was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and my own ragged breathing. He stood there, his chest heaving, his jaw clenched. I saw the immense weight he carried, the burden of leadership, the crushing responsibility for every life behind these walls. and I saw the flicker of something else in his golden eyes, something that looked almost like regret for his outburst. Slowly, deliberately, he reined his anger in. The tension in his shoulders eased, and the inferno in his eyes banked to a low smolder. "There is one way," he said, his voice low and strained. "A chance. But it is dangerous. And it will require you to trust me. Completely." "What is it?" "Your hunters are looking for a ghost. A woman who vanished. We need to give them a body." My blood ran cold. "You're going to kill me?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "We're going to kill Chloe Larson. We're going to stage your death. We'll take your car, what's left of it, and push it into the ravine at the edge of the territory miles from here. We'll leave enough evidence, a piece of bloody clothing, to make it look like a tragic accident. Your trackers, if they're as good as you say, will find the site. They'll report you dead. They'll call off the hunt." The plan was audacious. It was desperate. It was insane. But as I looked at him, at the grim certainty on his face, I realized it was also my only hope. And his only hope. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed his face. "I need your jacket. The one you were wearing. And I need blood." He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a wicked-looking hunting knife and a small, clean wooden bowl. My throat went dry. "Whose blood?" Declan turned, the firelight catching the polished steel of the blade. His golden eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw not a captor, not a monster, but a reluctant and terrifying ally. "Mine," he said. Chapter 5. I watched, frozen, as Declan held the knife over the simple wooden bowl. There was no ceremony, no hesitation. He drew the blade across the fleshy part of his forearm in a single fluid motion. The cut was deep and clean. Blood, dark and shockingly red, welled up instantly and began to drip a steady rhythm into the bowl. He didn't so much as flinch, his gaze locked on mine, his golden eyes challenging me to look away. I couldn't. This was a sacrifice. An act of brutal pragmatism, yes, but a sacrifice nonetheless. He was shedding his own blood to protect his family from a mess that I had created. The lines between captor and protector, monster and man, blurred into an unrecognizable gray. In that moment, watching him bleed for my manufactured death, I felt an unwilling, terrifyingly potent connection to him. It was a bond forged in desperation and sealed in blood. When the bowl was a quarter full, he set the knife aside, grabbed a clean cloth from the kitchen area, and wrapped his arm tightly, stemming the flow. He picked up the bowl and my ruined suit jacket. "Marcus and I will take the car tonight," he said, his voice a low, gravelly thing. "You're coming with us." My eyes widened. "Me? Why?" "You know these people who are hunting you," he stated simply. "You know how they think. When we stage the scene, you will be there to make sure it's convincing. You will tell us if something is wrong. No mistakes." The thought of leaving the compound, of venturing into the shrieking darkness, sent a wave of nausea through me. But I saw the logic in his command. This was my mess. I had to see it through. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. We left an hour after moonrise. The night was cold and unnervingly quiet. Declan had warned the pack, and the entire compound was on high alert, a silent army waiting for a battle. Marcus met us at the gate, his face a grim mask of disapproval. He carried a coil of thick rope over his shoulder and a heavy-looking axe. His hostile gaze flickered between me and the tightly bound wound on Declan's arm. "Bleeding for an outsider, Alpha," Marcus bit out, his voice a low snarl. "This is a mistake." "Your opinion is noted," Declan replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Now let's move. We need to be back before dawn." The three of us slipped out of a small hidden gate in the palisade. The forest that had seemed menacing from behind the wall was exponentially more terrifying from within. Every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen life. Every gust of wind sounded like a pursuing footstep. Declan moved with a preternatural silence, his senses on high alert. I did my best to imitate him, stepping where he stepped, trying to control my ragged breathing. Marcus followed behind us, a hulking, resentful shadow guarding our rear. We had been walking for nearly an hour, navigating by the silver light of the moon, when Declan suddenly stopped. He threw out an arm, barring my path, and pushed me gently behind a thicket of ferns. Marcus was instantly at his side, his body coiled like a spring, the axe held at the ready. Declan tilted his head, listening. Then I heard it. A wet, slobbering sound accompanied by a faint, dragging footstep. It was close. Too close. My blood turned to ice. Declan put a finger to his lips, his golden eyes glowing with a feral intensity. He pointed. Through the leaves I saw one of them. A wretched. It was hunched over, its body a twisted parody of a man or a wolf. Its limbs were too long, bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was pallid and hairless in patches, stretched tight over a gaunt, skeletal frame. It shuffled forward, its head twitching from side to side, milky white eyes scanning the darkness. A low, continuous moan of agony escaped its throat. The scent that rolled off it was the smell of rotten old blood, a stench so foul it made me want to gag. It was sniffing the air, its movements jerky and unpredictable. It stopped, its ruined face turning in our direction. Its nostrils flared. It had smelled us. I thought my heart would stop. Marcus let out a growl so low it was barely audible. But Declan remained perfectly still, a statue of absolute calm. He met my terrified gaze and gave a slow, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't move. The creature took a hesitant, shuffling step toward us. Then another. We were 20 feet away. 10. I could see the yellowed, broken teeth in its gaping mouth. Just as it was about to break into a lurching run, a piercing shriek echoed from deeper in the woods to our right. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. Another wretched was calling. With a final, gurgling cry of frustration, it turned and shambled away, disappearing into the darkness to join its brethren. We waited in silence for a full 5 minutes before Declan finally moved. He helped me to my feet, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. They're hunting in a pack tonight, Marcus murmured, his voice grim. We need to get to the ravine. Now. We reached the wreckage of my Mercedes an hour later. It had been dragged and hidden near the cliff's edge. Seeing it again was like seeing a ghost from another life. The door was still missing. The windows were shattered. It was a metal carcass. Working with grim efficiency, Declan and Marcus tied the ropes to the rear axle. While they worked, I took the jacket, its fabric still stiffening with Declan's drying blood, and wedged it into the twisted metal of the driver's side, as if it had been torn from my body during the crash. I looked down at the sheer drop into the rocky chasm below. This was it. The death of Chloe Larson. A strange sense of finality, of release, washed over me. It's ready, I said, my voice steady. Declan and Marcus took their positions. With a shared look and a grunt of immense effort, they pushed. The car teetered on the edge for a heart-stopping second, and then it was gone, plunging into the darkness. We didn't hear the crash for several seconds, but when it came, it was a thunderous, echoing symphony of destruction. A definitive, violent end. The journey back was a blur of adrenaline. We moved quickly, the threat of the wretched a constant spur. We made it back inside the gate just as the first hint of gray was lightening the eastern sky, the mission complete. Exhaustion hit me like a physical blow so profound that I stumbled. Declan caught me, his arm wrapping around my waist to steady me. It's done, he said, his voice low and close to my ear. We stood there for a moment, the shared danger and the morbid success of our plan creating a strange bubble of intimacy around us. Even Marcus seemed to have lost some of his hostility, giving me a grudging, almost respectful nod before heading toward the barracks. For the first time in weeks, a fragile sliver of hope began to bloom in my chest. Maybe it would work. Maybe I was finally free. That hope lasted for exactly 2 days. Late on the second night, a scout came sprinting into the main hall where Declan was reviewing patrol schedules. The man was breathless, his eyes wide. Alpha, he panted, leaning against the door frame. The trackers found the wreck. We watched from the ridge. They scoured the site for hours. Declan stood up, his expression tense. And, are they leaving? The scout shook his head, his face pale in the firelight. No, Alpha, he said, his voice filled with dread. They found the car. They saw the blood. But they didn't find a body. He took a deep, shuddering breath. They're not leaving. They've split up. They're starting a grid search of the forest. Chapter 6. The scout's words fell like stones into a silent pool, and the ripples of dread washed over the entire room. Failed. The plan had failed. The trackers weren't leaving. They were hunting. My desperate gamble for freedom had just painted a giant, unmissable target on the back of the only home I had left. The fragile composure of the last 2 days shattered. Marcus let out a string of curses, his hand gripping the handle of the axe at his belt. I knew it, he snarled, his furious gaze landing on me. I told you this was a mistake, Declan. We should have left her for the wretched. Now her filth is seeping into our home. Enough, Marcus. Declan's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury, but his mind was already working, the strategist taking over. Panic is a luxury we don't have. What's their pattern? He demanded of the scout. They're moving in 3-man teams, the scout reported, catching his breath. Spreading out from the ravine. They're professionals, Alpha. They move quiet, use hand signals. They're sweeping the territory, section by section. My blood ran cold. I knew those tactics. Vance had once boasted about the efficiency of his security teams. They won't find the valley by chance, Declan said, thinking aloud. The natural geography hides us too well. They don't need to, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. Everyone turned to look at me. The helpless businesswoman was gone, replaced by the analyst who had spent a decade anticipating the moves of her rivals. They're not looking for a settlement. They're looking for me. They'll be looking for signs of a survivor. A trail. A shelter. They'll use thermal imaging. At night, the heat from our chimneys from the bonfire will light up on their screens like a city. The color drained from the scout's face. Marcus stared at me, his animosity momentarily eclipsed by a flicker of shock. Declan's golden eyes narrowed, focusing on me with a new, sharp intensity. They are methodical, I continued, my mind racing. The man leading them is likely named Dimitri. He was Vance's head of security. He's patient, but he's also arrogant. He believes no one can outsmart him. He'll push his teams hard, force them to take risks to cover ground faster. Declan absorbed this, a slow nod his only response. The arrogance is what will kill him. He turned to Marcus. Call the council. I want you, Elena, and the senior patrol leaders in my cabin. Now. He looked back at me. You started this. You will help me finish it. The council was a tense, grim affair. I stood beside the hearth, an outsider in the heart of their secret world, and laid out everything I knew about Dimitri's tactics, his likely equipment, and his mindset. I spoke their language now, not of profits and losses but of threats and countermeasures. Marcus argued for an immediate, brutal assault, to wipe the hunters out before they could get any closer. Elena, ever the voice of reason, cautioned against it, reminding them of the risk of attracting the wretched with a large-scale battle. She's right, Declan said, silencing the arguments. We don't meet them with brute force. We hunt the hunters. We use our knowledge of this forest, our speed, our senses. We will be ghost. We will take them apart, one team at a time, before they even know they're the ones being preyed upon. His gaze settled on me. Chloe's information gives us the edge. Dimitri's arrogance will make him split his forces. That's the weakness we will exploit. The plan was set. They would send out 2 shifter teams, faster, quieter, and deadlier than any human. They would intercept the trackers, using hit-and-run tactics to eliminate them before they could raise an alarm. It was a dangerous, bloody strategy, but it was the only one they had. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I remained in Declan's cabin, which had become a command center. I helped Elena prepare bandages and herbal poultices, my hands shaking as I imagined the wounds they might soon be treating. Declan was a whirlwind of focused energy, dispatching teams, receiving reports from scouts, his presence a calming, formidable anchor in a sea of chaos. The first report of contact came just after dusk. A tracker team had been intercepted and eliminated near the northern ridge. The victory was clean, swift, and silent. But the second team proved more difficult. They were closer to the compound and had stumbled upon a pack patrol. A fight had broken out. "There's gunfire," a scout reported, his chest heaving as he burst into the cabin. "South sector. Near the old creek bed." Declan's jaw tightened. "Gunfire will draw every wretched in the territory." He grabbed a heavy blade from the wall. "Marcus with me. The rest of you lock down the compound. No one in or out." He looked at me, his golden eyes blazing. "Stay here." It wasn't a request. But as he turned to leave, I couldn't stop myself. "Declan." He paused at the door. "Dimitri," I said, my voice urgent. "If he's with that team, he won't go down easy. He'll have a fallback. A satellite phone. Something to signal his position if he's compromised." Declan gave a curt, sharp nod of understanding and was gone, melting into the night with Marcus at his heels. The hours that followed were an agony of silence. I sat with Elena by the fire, listening to the distant, terrifying sounds that drifted on the wind. The sporadic pop of gunfire, the answering enraged shrieks of the wretched, and the deep, challenging howls of the pack. The war I had brought to their door was finally raging. Just before dawn they returned. Declan entered first, his face smeared with dirt and blood that wasn't his own. He was limping slightly, a long gash on his thigh crudely bandaged. Marcus followed, his arm in a sling, but his expression was one of grim triumph. "It's done," Declan said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Dimitri is dead. His teams are gone." Relief so potent it made me dizzy washed through me. I rushed forward, my hands hovering over the wound on his leg. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he grunted, but he leaned his weight against the table, the adrenaline clearly fading. Elena was already at his side, cutting away the ruined trousers to inspect the wound. "The good news," Marcus said, his voice rough but devoid of its usual hostility as he looked at me, "is that your intel was right. Dimitri had a sat phone. He was trying to use it when Declan took him down. We stopped the signal from going out. The war for now was over. We had won. The immediate threat was gone." Later, after Elena had stitched and dressed his wound, Declan and I stood alone outside the cabin. The rising sun was beginning to burn away the morning mist, bathing the valley in a soft golden light. The air was still, the sounds of the wretched and the gunfire replaced by the peaceful awakening of the compound. "They'll stop looking for you now," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the palisade. "The Petrov Syndicate will assume their best team simply vanished in the wilderness. They won't risk sending more." Chloe Larson was officially a ghost. I was free. But the realization brought no joy, only a profound sense of emptiness. Free to go where? Back to a world where I had no name, no future? "This place," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The wall you've built. It's not just to keep the wretched out, is it? It's to keep your family in. Safe." He turned to look at me and the weariness in his eyes was ancient. "It's all I have. It's all any of us have." We stood in silence, the unspoken truth hanging in the air between us. I didn't belong here. But I no longer belonged anywhere else. "The war with the men in suits may be over," I said, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "But the war with the wretched isn't. You're still in danger." "We have always been in danger," he countered, a sad finality in his tone. "I know," I said, and I took a step closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "But this time I'm not running." A flicker of surprise, of something deep and unguarded, moved in his golden eyes. He saw not the frightened businesswoman he'd pulled from a car, but the ally who had stood with him, the woman who understood the price of survival. His hand came up, his calloused fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. The touch was no longer a threat, but a question, a promise. He hadn't offered me sanctuary. He hadn't invited me to stay. He didn't have to. In the ruins of my old life, amidst the blood and the fear, I had found the one thing I hadn't even known I was looking for. I was on the wrong side of the border, but for the very first time I was finally home. And that's where we leave them, on the edge of a new dawn, a new war and a new life. Chloe Larson is dead, but the woman she's become has finally found her place in a world she never knew existed. But the real story is just beginning. The Petrov Syndicate doesn't just forget about their failures, and the threat of the wretched is growing stronger every day. What happens when Declan has to choose between protecting his new love and protecting his pack? The only way to find out is to be here for the next chapter of their story. If you're as desperate as I am to see what happens next, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications. It's the only way to guarantee you won't miss the moment we return to the wrong side of the border. Let me know in the comments. What do you think the pack should do to prepare for the wretched's next attack? I read every single one. Thanks for watching.